Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Lessons from Major Transformation Projects. I'm Jill Rutter, I'm a Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government. I'm delighted to have been asked to chair today's session. Just a couple of housekeeping points to kick off with. First, you're all muted, but don't let that stop you asking questions. You can post your questions, start posting as soon as you want, and we will feed them in through the session and try to weave those into our conversations. So get asking away. Secondly, the APM are keen to improve their webinars. And so they'd be very grateful if you could fill in a survey that they're going to post into the chat. And in fact, has just been posted now. So do answer that survey. There'll be another opportunity to if you fail to during this session. But anyway, so what are we talking about today? Today, we're going to be talking about transformation projects, which are significant initiatives that organizations undertake to change operations, strategies, or culture. So they're different from regular change management because they're more profound, have a greater impact, we hope, and broader scope. They're normally executed rapidly and have a persuasive justification. A current major transformation project that the audience may have heard about is the government's plans to merge the Infrastructure and Projects Authority and the National Infrastructure Commission into a National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, inevitably called NISTA, by spring 2025 to enhance the government's delivery of projects. So the team at APM have been researching and consulting project experts on how NISTA and other large-scale transformation projects can be achieved, which brings us to today's event, where we have three experts in transformation initiatives who will talk about their experiences in this area. So to go to my panelists, first of all, essentially needs no introduction at all. I'm delighted that we're joined by the Right Honourable Matt Hancock. Matt was Secretary of State for Health and Social Care in the UK government, but did a lot of other jobs as well. And Matt is going to be talking about his experience merging Infrastructure UK and the Major Projects Authority into the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, which has very real relevance to the creation of NISTA. Second, I have Steph Illingworth. Steph is Group Head of Project Management Office at Rolls-Royce. Steph is going to be talking about the Project Performance Accelerator Programme at National Highways. And last but by no means least, we have James White, Programme Manager at AWE and an APM Board Trustee. James is going to be talking about his experience at the Geological Disposal Facility Programme, which is much more interesting than it sounds on paper. So let's kick off. I'm going to just start with a sort of general question. I'm going to put the same question to each of you. Can you share a bit about your background in transformation projects, particularly in the context of major infrastructure projects and public sector mergers? Matt, let's go to you first.
Well, thanks, Jill. I think I was invited on this esteemed panel because of my role overseeing the merger that led to the IPA, and I know that the merger now of the IPA with the National Infrastructure Commission is a hot topic. But I've also been involved as the ministerial sponsor of endless major projects in government, and so I've got some significant experience of where projects have gone well, where they've gone badly, and also some projects that are on the surface have gone badly, but have in fact reformed the way that projects are delivered and brought in proper project scrutiny within government. So my role was not as an SRO of projects directly, but scrutinizing the SROs and having put in place the IPA, then myself being held to account by the IPA. So I've seen it from both sides.
And do you count the IPA, Matt, as a success in your creation?
I think so, yes. I think so. I mean, the story of the merger of to create the IPA, the creation of the National Infrastructure Commission at essentially the same time was a classic of government, where the Cabinet Office where I was merging the Infrastructure UK as was, and the Major Projects Authority, at the same time as the Treasury was coming up with the idea of having a wholly independent commission. And so we merged two organisations with different roles in this area, and instead of ending up with one, we created another one alongside it. There's good reasons for that, and I think the reasons for it are instructive as to how to make the current merger a success. But I would say that the IPA was incredibly helpful in holding the system to account. And as a minister, where you're in that typically in normal times in that non-executive role, actually the IPA is your friend in trying to ensure that the department stays on track.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. We've talked up one success. Steph, tell us a bit about what you've done.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So yeah, Steph Illingworth. I'm here today to talk to you about Project Performance Accelerator, which is a transformation programme I was privileged to lead over at National Highways. So a little bit of context about the project. So National Highways was given around £25 billion worth of investment for their roads period 2. But as everything, nothing's ever quite simple. They were also given a £2.5 billion efficiency challenge, which was rather a large sum. So what we did, we brought in McKinsey to help us deliver a transformation efficiency roadmap. And that resulted in the creation of 5 transformation work streams. So the one I'm going to talk to you about today is the people element, which is the one I was privileged to lead. However, the one I led was around 40% of the overall efficiency, so a huge number. So from that point, I knew what the problem statement was, but I didn't quite know what the solution was going to be. I thought, how am I going to figure this one out? This is a big, big number, and I wanted to. I also wanted it to be something that would be really user friendly as well, and have a massive impact in terms of culture and behaviours as well. So the 2 sets of data that I used to try and sort out the solution was around the P3M3 assessment that had just been done across the capability across the teams, and that gave me some real data and insight into how the teams were performing and where the skill gaps could be. The second data set, which was significant, was around the construction spend. So within major projects, highways in particular, the construction spend is significantly higher than many other projects, and we didn't know why. So that was a real opportunity to be able to say, well, if we target that, that's going to help me with those efficiencies. So for the 3 years that I led the project through the pandemic, which was fun, I delivered 2 key outputs. The first output was a project management handbook, and it was a handbook. It wasn't a manual. It was an academic document. It was very much a user-friendly project management handbook. And it covered up to 7 years of a life cycle of a typical project. So it was full of hints and tips, case studies. We did live interviews with seasoned professionals that had been there and done that and kind of had the scars. And we made it very, very interactive. So that was one of the main outputs, and it was really successfully landed as well. The second one was far more complex. So we introduced a 26-week learner journey for all delivery professionals, and that included anybody that was working on a project. I didn't want it to be a training program. I wanted it to be something that's much more immersive. So we started the 26 weeks off with a little bit of pre-learning, and that helped everybody get on the same page so that when they did join us, we were all speaking the same language. The second part of the 26 weeks, which is the bit I'm really, really proud of, we did individual coaching sessions with every single member. I'm a trained coach, so I made sure that every single individual person had received an assessment, a coaching session, and then I would take that information and work with the project leader to say, this is your team construct, this is the diversity of your team, and this is how you can potentially use your team and play to the team's strengths. And then fast forward, we created a learner journey, which was a 5-day immersive program, and we built a dummy project. And the dummy project was made up of real life scenarios, real things that had happened on the projects for years, and we wanted to try and build it so it was really, really, really interesting. We brought 2 project teams along, and it was during the pandemic, so it was all online. And we went through the whole life cycle of a typical project. We did shared learning. We made sure that people were, from junior member to senior member, that they were sharing their experiences. And then we sent them away with problems, and they'd go away, fix a problem, and come back and then discuss it as a group. So the real, just to close this out, the real learning outcomes for me that I tried to focus on was teamwork, high performing, diversity of thinking, and then the second one was around project controls, tools and techniques. So if you're in a project, you don't need to be an expert in project controls, but you do need to understand the performance of that project and how you would monitor it and how you can understand whether the project's on track or not. So what we built some real key learning around that. We made it a game and people, you know, really enjoyed playing it and they could kind of understand the language. The second thing we did was around commercial skills. So again, you don't need to be an NEC expert to work on a project, but you do need to have an appreciation of commercial skills. So we did that as well. We looked at stakeholder management. So quite often gets underestimated. So if you've got a really difficult, complex project with a really, really big key stakeholder that's going to cause a lot of delays, you need to build that into your program. And we did a lot around that. And then the final piece, big piece really, was around governance. So governance can be your friend, it can also be your enemy. And in highways, we had a lot of governance issues where it was causing blockages to delivery. So we took that information and we fed it back into the company. And more importantly, we used that to feed the IPA. So when you look at the front end loading, the work around governance and making sure that you get some of the activities up, you know, the start of your life cycle, that came from some of the work that we did. So just to finish this off, just to give you an idea of the scale of the programme, 80 projects, 1,000 participants, and we made sure it was from junior through to senior, and we included all of our secondees, our supply chain, and we had one team approach, which fostered that inclusive culture. So we worked as one team. So I'll stop there and hopefully I get some more questions throughout this session. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask you one more, Steph, which is all that material, I mean, presumably well applicable, well beyond what you were doing National Highways. So is that material available to other people? Do the IPA push it at other project teams?
I would love to share
suggesting
it.
doing it? Okay.
Yeah, no, a really great question. So yeah, they're still using it in National Highways. Obviously things need to gather momentum. So some people probably, you know, we won't carry on with all of it, but I've taken it to some places. It's available. I've shared it with the APM. So I'm on the Southeast network and we've shared that information with them as well. So we can start to reuse it. Absolutely shouldn't sit on a shelf.
Okay, brilliant. And let's finally go to James. James, tell us a bit about your background. And I think you've certainly had to deal with big significant stakeholders, haven't you, in your very problematic geological disposal facility?
Sure. Let me bring you in from the IPA that Matt talked about a minute ago that he set up. So the IPA focuses on circa now 230 GMPP programs. That's government major project portfolio and then the program. So there's 230, and the through life cost for the pipeline of work out of those 230 circa programs is around 800. It's above it, 800 billion. So there's 230 of these GMPP programs that are being delivered, you know, assured by the IPA on and managed from a cost and a date perspective on that through life cost. I've worked on the last 12 years on 4 of those GMPP programs out of that big portfolio pot. So the ones that I've worked on is the Dreadnought class submarine. So there's 4 of those that provide us the continuous at sea deterrent. They are circa billions each. Also the 7 attack submarines, the Astute class, that's another GMPP program. So I've worked on that. I've also worked at Rolls-Royce Rainsway in Derby as a program manager on a new nuclear facility, and that's part of the core production capability program, which is also a GMPP program, circa £3.5 billion upgrade to the Rolls-Royce Rainsway site for manufacturing the core element of the reactor core of the submarines. I then moved to the GDF program, which you referred to a minute ago. That was the last, or before the one I'm currently working on, the last GMPP program. So the GDF, the Geological Disposal Facility. So some context about that. It's a future program, so it's not being delivered yet. They've been working on it at the minute, and what it is it's to host 750,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste. Now, nuclear's been around circa 70 years, and that legacy of 70 years of waste has been stored predominantly at Sellafield up north, and it's been stored above the ground. 70 years of waste in storage accumulates to quite a lot. But the program is not to just to store the previous 70 years worth, it's also to store the next 100. So this disposal facility will pick up 70 years of previous and the future 100. And if you think about radioactive waste, it's created, from medicine in X-ray machines in hospitals to the reactor cores to the defense program, Hinkley Point, our energy reactors there, the new fusion program, all of these programs, if you like, will create this radioactive waste. And this storage on this GMPP program is pretty impressive from an engineering point of view, and that's why it's circa 20 to 53 billion pounds in cost to do it. And the depth is between 200 and 1,000 meters deep. So from an engineering point of view, it's a significant program. Now, when I joined the organization, the status quo at the time was about 85 scientists and a few project controls. And when I say a few, less than half a dozen that were managing, the cost of the program at this point of time. You've got a very academic organization that's doing research in the radioactive side of things for what the type of the containers need to be manufactured to go in the different geological ground conditions. Now, you're trying to move 85 scientists from their, the type of design they're doing for containers, etc., into a big GMPP program that needs to move into delivery construction to build this repository. You need a directorate. So I was put in charge of standing up a program directorate under the director at the time, and we recruited against an org structure of about 23 for a PMO, for a program management office. But that was to build it up from scratch. And I think throughout this this panel event, I'll be able to talk and answer the questions about what I did in standing up and delivering transforming a program from nothing, i.e. what I've just explained, to a fully operational, delivery-focused program on the GDF.
Okay, this is really interesting. Got lots of questions coming in, but I want to start just by asking you about, what do you think the biggest pitfalls or challenges are in delivering big transformation projects, particularly in the public sector? I don't know whether there's a big difference in the public sector and the private sector that any of you might want to comment on. So what's the sort of big problems, and actually what's the best approach to managing those risks? Who wants to pitch in first? Matt,
Well, we've
do you
only
want
got
to
41
go?
minutes left, Jill. So where to start really is my reaction to the question. Certainly at the in my experience, the absolute number one core to get right, and this is going to be at the core of whether the new merged authority is right, is getting lines of accountability, and accountability lined up with the levers of decision making. The projects that go badly tend to have those two in different places, and the projects that go well tend to, not always, have them essentially in the same place. It was interesting listening to Stephanie talking about the frustration of blockages in delivery. In my time in government, I regarded the RIS project as an absolute model because of the timing, so people knew what was coming next. And in fact, the new hospital program was designed to have a RIS style cycle. And I did that explicitly to follow the RIS program. But if you're going to have whatever scale of project, getting that accountability lined up with where the decision-making levers actually in practice lie is absolutely critical.
Steph.
No, I agree with that. I think I had that down on my list. But one of the other things to think about is the embedment piece. So we deliver a transformation project, and I think we forget that back end where people will roll off, the job will finish, the supply chain go, and actually the embedment piece to make sure that that change is actually landing and that people can actually use it and see the benefits to it. I think sometimes we forget that back end, and then therefore people will naturally revert back to their old ways of working. So I think it's about making sure that the misconception for me is that a project doesn't necessarily end. You need to build in that extra piece at the end to make sure that people can actually see the benefits and it's embedded. Because I've seen it so many times where there's things are rolled out and people will just revert back because they haven't got that extra support at the end to make sure it lands. And you've got to measure it as well. So that's one of the things for me.
That's really interesting. James, anything to add?
Yes, for me, transformation, it's a spider's web of complexity, but it doesn't necessarily have to be if you have a sort of framework that you can work through to get to success at the end. So you need to understand what the blueprint is and the future state. Now, amongst the spider web, I think the biggest one for me is don't underestimate the level of effort and time required to do the transformation. And that point connects to so many other bits of the spider's web, because whatever you're transforming, whatever program, whoever comes up with the idea and then the plan that takes you from point A to point B, the future state, I think the thing that is underestimated is the amount of time that people are actually doing the business as usual work, whatever it is at the minute, are expected to transform from this state to that state. So it might be an organizational restructure, different ways of doing processes, new manufacturing, or a completely new operation itself. The people that are doing the work at that point in time will be told on the journey, right, you need to now do it this way, or you need to go and move into that department and do it like this. But that they're still expected to do their work that they've already got to do. Transformation requires more effort from people than their normal day job, and I think that is really underestimated. And we all use the supply chain to help us, but the supply chain come up with all these great ideas, and often the client doesn't use their resource to help them to do it. They'll ask them to create the plan, tell us how we need to get to the future state, but sometimes the business doesn't fully appreciate the level of effort. That's my point. And then that slows you down. That hits things like culture, the people thing that Steph alluded to earlier. It's all connected, but it's really important for me, that point is don't underestimate the level of effort to do the transformation.
We've got a question here from Joe Stanford, and I'm going to read it out, probably see what we really think of this. She's asked, how do we build the project profession skills and capability needed on the frontline delivery of public sector services beyond the government department's policies and their ALB high-level strategy? So actually, is there a sort of disconnect almost between the sort of people in government making decisions and actually what needs to happen on the front line? And do we have enough skills? Do we spend enough time and effort in assembling people's skills? I was interested, Steph, that you said you got help from McKinsey. I think it's quite interesting. What's the role of consultants in helping with some of this? Steph, do you want to pick that one up first about, do we have the skills? Do we need to build the skills? Does more need to be done?
So it's quite a complex question, but yeah, I'll try and address it. So McKinsey came in to help us build an efficiency roadmap, but the way I delivered it was using APM material, making sure that the suppliers that I had were really embedded in the team, and we followed traditional skills, but we used the APM framework. That's how we did it. I think the example I'd give there, and hopefully this is answering the question. So if we talk about the IPA, I personally think it's great, and there's some really good stuff in it. Is it embedded across the whole project profession? Probably not. If you asked 100 of our project professionals out there, do they know what the IPA is and how they apply it to their projects to get that best practice through? You probably wouldn't get 100% of an answer. So I think this is an opportunity for us to be able to connect the good practice that's happening across government and the good practice that's happening across the project profession and glue it together. Because, you know, if we're going to roll out NISTA, then we need to make sure that people really understand why we're doing it. What's the point? And so I don't know whether that's answered the question, but, you know, the way I did capability was very much following, you know, the good practice that APM, NPA, etc. And then I weaved the whole culture and behaviours around it as well to make sure that, you know, in a project team, there are all types of people. Everybody's, you know, different. And I wanted to make sure that that team could play to the strengths of the team and understand how they could become a high performing team with their strengths. So I used both, capability from APM, team culture, and that's how I rolled out the capability lift. And using the data from the P3M model, which was very clear and told me where the capability gaps were. So it was a really good piece of starting point for me. I don't know who answered that question, but hopefully I've answered that. If not, that's now.
And Matt, are you confident that we have enough skills? What more can be done to make sure that we have the skills? I mean, government has a massive pipeline of potential sort of projects that it wants to do at the moment. Do we have the skills in the public sector to actually deliver those effectively?
Well, it's always easy to knock the public sector's ability, but it does deliver some extraordinary projects incredibly well, as well as have some probably more famous failures. And it's a sort of nature of government, and entirely right in a democracy, that it's where it goes wrong that gets the most scrutiny. What I'd say is that I think it's improved quite a lot, but there's a long way to go. And I hope that NISTA can really lean into this agenda. You need, in my view, inside government a project professionals stream, a cadre of project professionals. And there is a pay issue there. I think they need to be paid properly and at market rates. And then you need training for senior managers, including ministers, by the way, and SROs. But then critically, you need to embed project skills in mainstream public service and civil service senior leadership. You know, I think that you shouldn't be able to get above a certain level, probably director level, without significant SRO project experience, because inevitably when you get into the most senior jobs, there are very, very significant projects to manage. So I think there's definitely more that can be done. I hope NISTA can help government to do it, but some of it means biting the bullet. You know, it's the public sector pay is always a tricky question, but you have to make a career in public sector project management an attractive prospect when we know that there are many significant organisations, private organisations like Rolls-Royce, who are out there looking for the most talented. It's an irony, isn't it, that the biggest projects are in government, and that's really where the most talented project management needs to be.
That is very interesting. I've got a question here of somebody querying whether the private sector really is better at delivering complex projects. I think we could have that debate for ages, but we won't do that. And Andrew, skills, capability, do you think we have enough?
So from my perspective, I think it's a real live example in the nuclear sector. When you hear about the programs that are coming online, you know, you've got Hinkley, where that is in construction, but you've got Sizewell starting that journey. So if you pick up all the resource from there and put them across to Sizewell, there's no opportunity for the new programs like the small modular reactor, the fusion program, the GDF program, you know, the submarine program, etc., etc. It's been identified by government that the shortage of resource in the nuclear sector is circa around 100,000 over the next 10 to 15 years. They are actively addressing that shortfall now to try and meet that gap. You've got to attack it from two ways, in my opinion, to get the SWEP resource in the right place at the right time. And I think from a bottom-up approach, you know, it's using things like the government program, the STEM, the science, technology, engineering and maths program, you know, getting in and getting the apprentices educated young into that project management speciality, so they can become experts in 10 to 15 years time. Also, from a top-down perspective, the IPA have set out the Project Delivery Competency Framework, which is about SQUEP resourcing, as Matt alluded to, from very senior levels, SROs doing the MPLA, the Major Projects Leadership Academy, all the way down, right down to project managers. And the real excellent thing that's going on, or has gone on, is that the APM is collaboratively working with the IPA, and all of the methodology and the taxonomy of how the IPA have set the stall, the APM have linked to. So from a project management point of view, through all the different levels of project manager in your career, you can use that framework to become SQUEP. The real key for success here is that it needs sponsorship from the programs. If you've got lack of sponsorship about this environment, this ecosystem I've just referenced there, then how are you going to be successful? Back to my point a minute ago, you might have an idea that that's where you want to go on the roadmap, but you need A, sponsorship, and B, the right people in the right place to make this happen, take people through that career journey.
Interesting. Do you see this, and James, do you see the skills needed, as this question from Matt Wyndham, do you see the skills needed as changing over the next 5 to 10 years? Skills, methods, or approaches? I mean, should we just go on doing what we're doing, or do we need to adapt?
Well, I actually think that the standards out there and the processes are out there are really robust. They have been, moved on with time. If you went back 50 years to how projects were delivered, we're more in a digital age, etc. Now, computers and all of that, and things are really more efficient and effective. I think it's fit for purpose now. Where is AI going to take us in the next 10 years? In the way we do our business, that's another topic completely, isn't it? But from a process point of view, from a people point of view, from more effective with the numbers and the data, I think we will evolve as AI evolves. Clearly, probably slightly behind the curve, but that's a fascinating, adventure.
Matt, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm sure you do.
Well, absolutely, and I think the government does work really hard to stay on top of it, and some of the senior project management is absolutely exemplary, and the training schools that have been brought in, the various programs that James mentioned, are really very good, and people take them very, very seriously. So I think there has been a lot of good progress in this space. There's no doubt the systems will change and improve. Even thinking about where we were 10, 15 years ago, the capability and the ability to use technology to help to manage a project has improved no end. And so I think that I'm quite optimistic, and especially because there are institutions whose role is to worry about this, and therefore it's more likely to happen.
Steph, I want to ask you a slightly different question that came in, which was, your Project Performance Accelerator really sort of emphasised some of the sort of softer aspects, the team working and things like that. But we had a question about how difficult was it to convince the people running the projects? You took people away from their sort of day job for little bits of time to immerse them in this learner journey, things like that. How did you actually convince people that this was a good use of time and resource in a sort of project environment with presumably sort of quite pressing deadlines? Was that difficult? And how would you make the case more generally?
Very, very difficult. I remember it well. So yes, it was a huge amount of time. So some of the program directors were not particularly happy about the fact that the teams were coming offline for a week here and several days. So what we did, we used a pilot scheme. So we took the Stonehenge project offline, and we asked them would they be the pilots, and then another project in the southeast as well. And we had 2 pilot projects, and we wanted to say, look, is this worth your time? So we took them off, and we did the learner journey with them, and the feedback was so good that actually gave a convincing argument as to why everybody else would want to do it. And if anyone's on the call who was part of it, it became the place that people wanted to be. Because it was like, can we join the party? But the first few months were really challenging. I had a lot of kickback from people saying, I can't take that time out, I'm too busy. But what we did was we used these two really key projects with significance, and we actually took them through it, and then we took the feedback and then we shared that back, and then it kind of like grew momentum. And then about 2 to 3 months into it, we had a list of projects wanting to come on it. But that's how I managed that. But there was a lot of resistance at the very beginning, absolutely, and I probably would have felt the same as well. So I understood it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
James, could you just tell us a bit about the way in which you approach managing stakeholders in your GDF project? Because
Sure.
an awful lot of upcoming projects are going to have quite tricky stakeholder issues, I think, to manage through.
Yeah, the thing for me is a clear vision right at the top of the tree. And you need everybody to buy into that, because you're all going on a journey, but it all needs to be the same journey. And if the vision's clear, and a good way of doing that is big notice boards, when you come into the organization, this is what we're doing, and to underpin that, there's two things. One is clear communication that's all about that vision. You're taking your stakeholders on that journey, whether they're internal to the building, government departments, the supply chain, your staff, they all need to be aligned to that vision, and the communication needs to be representative to your stakeholders. You would be potentially using communication teams, like on the GDF program. There's a department that's purely set up to do that communication and that stakeholder management, because they're working with communities where in the future this radioactive waste will be placed. So that's quite a very important thing. And I think that everything that underpins that vision, that communication, is again that sponsorship. So if you've got that sponsorship from the top down, that's supporting you as the program, as the projects in your mission and your vision, and that they're supportive of that communication, A, internally with the people in the company, and B, with you as the project or program director. It's all holistically linked and all very important. So I think a clear vision that's communicated well and good sponsorship is important.
Matt, let's just come on to the creation of NISTA, and just having sort of had the IPA, we've had the National Infrastructure Commission and the IPA as separate bodies, now brought them together. What do you think the sort of big challenges are actually in bringing those two quite different focused organisations together? And what do you think, if you were looking at it, what would you be setting as a sort of test of what does it need to do to add value and actually to be deemed to be a successful transformation? And where do you think the risks are that the government ought to take into account as it embarks on this merger?
So I can see the point of the merger, and I think that it can work, but they've got to get a couple of critical things right. The first thing is there are three different roles here. There are three different roles. One is auditing of ongoing projects. That's what the Major Projects Authority was invented for. It's what the major project list is for the 230-ish biggest projects. James gave the figures, absolutely colossal scale, and you cannot let the attention drift from the ongoing, constant auditing and holding to account and transparency that the MPA and then the IPA brought. I thought that was a very, very positive change in government when that was brought in 2010. And as I say, as a minister or as an SRO, the IPA is your friend, because they tell you about how your project's going in ways that you haven't always seen yourself. The second is essentially financing. That's what the old Infrastructure UK was. It's a treasury role. That was brought in at the tail end of the use of PFI to essentially try to allow for private financing in a world where PFI had not been seen to be very successful. it's been reasonably useful, but I think that the IPA is more of the first of those than the second of those. Nevertheless, it is a distinct and important role. And then the third is strategy and advice, which the National Infrastructure Commission has done. And there, the trick is that you need to be independent so that it's useful input into the sorts of thinking government should be doing anyway. But it also needs to be closely aligned strategically to government. Otherwise, you just end up with making recommendations that the government doesn't accept, and you might as well be a select committee or a think tank, which is no use at all. So merging these three things together, I think, has value. It can also got right, and NISTA will be the fulcrum of project capability and thought leadership within government, which I think is very powerful. And I hope that they get the independence of NISTA right, because it is quite tricky to be the auditor and transparency machine, which is really a cabinet office function, at the same time as being independent, at the same time as advising on the finances, which is really a treasury function. So getting the right level of independence with the right initial leadership team, getting all of that lined up properly is, I think, mission critical to its success. But it can work, and having one body that is the champion of project management inside government, I think, will be that will be good. And frankly, the test will be whether the strategy over major infrastructure and project work is successful, and we end up with a long-term plan for building infrastructure over time that lasts through the political cycle, and that you still have the boots on the ground going into the major projects with that little frisson and the goosebumps on the back of your neck when you hear that NISTA are coming in to check in on your project. You want the SAROs to be slightly trepidatious going into those meetings, constructive but robust.
And do you see it having a sort of planning sequencing role, given that we've got various questions coming in, we've got questions about skills, but also clear questions about workforce, questions about supply chain pressures and things like that. Because the last thing you want to do is to be trying to do too much at once and just not have the capacity to do all of that.
Yes, and in particular where there's crossover between different projects. So, taking the RIS example, deciding what order to build roads in, that is not for NISTA, that is for the DFT. But spotting the bottlenecks in nationally available capabilities, for instance, between a series of different projects that may be all coming to fruition at the same time, and then deconflicting those, or at least flagging them so that they can be dealt with in advance, that's vital. So my answer is yes, in the cross-cutting areas, but it's also then important to define those limits. Good fences make happy neighbours, and that is more true in government than anywhere else I've worked.
That's interesting. Steph, anything you would add to the list? What are you looking for NISTA to bring to the party? Steph, microphone.
On mute. So yeah, I think the piece that Matt talked about there about looking for those bottlenecks, wouldn't it be great if we have an integrated view of all the activity that's taking place, and we can roll that up and understand where we're going to have supply chain issues, where we're going to have demand issues, treating it as a massive programme of work. That would be a really great place to be, because I think projects are done in kind of silos, and I don't think there's a one view of all of the big potential bottlenecks where we're going to, which will slow projects down. So I think having that integrated view will be a really great place to be. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I think, the shared learning, James mentioned earlier around the skills and having that sponsorship top down, which I think I totally agree with. But I also think as well is that with transformation, you need to win the hearts and minds of people. You need to get the end users are the ones who are going to feel the pain. The end users are receiving that change, and we need to make sure that we've got top sponsorship and also the hearts and minds of the people who are receiving the change. So yeah, I think this is going to be good. I think we need to really understand it. We need to break it down. We need to understand the benefits of doing it and then communicate it effectively and then embed it. That's
Okay,
my view.
James, anything more to add?
Yeah, for me, the merger will hopefully improve things, take things to the next level. Why not become more efficient and effective? And I guess, that's the reason why you would merge in the first place. What's the strategy behind this? Now, just for me, success would be at the circa 230 GMPP programs that the IPA currently manages, or assures, if you like, into government. The circa 800 plus billion, just shy of £1 trillion in through life cost. Statistically, out of those 230, I think 30 are green, right, on the red, amber, green, which means they're going to be delivered to time and cost. There's circa, and I can't remember the numbers, but it's about 160 that are amber, and then you've got a few reds on there, quite a few reds. My point is the merger will hopefully bring more efficient and successful delivery, i.e. improving those greens, getting rid of the reds and reducing the ambers. Yeah.
Interesting.
If the British government ever has no reds in its major project planning, I'd eat my hat. And you would argue maybe it's then it would be not doing enough projects, because it's always some are going to go wrong by the nature of the thing.
Yeah, we've got a comment here from Jerin Varghese suggesting that actually the complex of major programs, and in particular transformation programs, go through a transition as the complexity scale of projects increases. How can transformation projects adapt in the VUCA? I haven't heard that before, but he says volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment to deliver against government's recent published plans.
So can I just push back on that? I kind of pick up on that because of course things are more volatile, and the recent spate of inflation wasn't at all helpful in project planning, and especially on the financial side, for instance. But data capability is so much greater. That so long that you've got these two big forces, one making life more difficult, one making life easier, and you've got to mitigate one and harness the other. So I don't think the future's all doom and gloom. Project capability, project theory, and project practice has got better over the years. And of course, there's still projects that are off track, and some of the ones are amber only because they are huge and still have a long way to go. So I don't think it should all be doom and gloom, but harnessing the data that's available and the technological capabilities, both for management purposes and of course within the substance of the project themselves, that can offset and mitigate some of the vulnerabilities and the volatility that we also see.
Do you think that the UK, that IPA and soon to be NISTA, does it do enough to actually interrogate projects to learn the sorts of lessons that you're bringing to this today and make those available to future projects, or have a sort of bank of experts to feed it in? I'm just wondering whether we're good enough at thinking after things finish or near completion, whether we do detailed lessons learnt from those exercises. I'm going to ask you to share all your lessons in a second. So anyway, Steph, do you think we rigorously and systematically learn lessons?
I think that's a really great question. It's been on my list of things to ask. So I don't think we do. I think we're missing an opportunity there. So I think in organisations you might have a lessons learned. At the end of a project, you take that information, you put it somewhere. Whether we then flow that back down to the start of a new project again, whether we share that in government, whether whether IPA is really taking that and doing something with it. I think, because the projects I talked about earlier, the programme that I led, we did a lot of that shared learning, churning through each, but it was in a small, just in one organisation. Imagine the opportunity of being able to do that. So I think that is a real opportunity for us. I also think that some of the more seasoned professionals, you tend to, you can see problems repeated again and again. Imagine using the power of some of our more experienced people who've been there and sort of got scars on the back, being able to share that back downstream again. So I think that's a really a really great opportunity for us to push that opportunity. I think it's something that could be a lot better.
Matt?
Yeah.
Well, I agree. And I think budget is well spent on these lessons learned exercises. Too often you get towards the end of the project, things might be tight or you might be over, and there isn't to set aside budget to do it in government. So I definitely think this is something that NISTA can work
What
on.
do we do with
And
it? Yeah.
and you've got to listen, and you've got to learn from the projects that go well as where things went wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And one of the things we're
Totally
not
agree.
very good at is learning from the bits of projects that went well, not that could have been improved further.
Yeah.
It's a bit like at the end of a football match, right? The team that loses, there's a post-match analysis, and everything was doom and gloom. What went wrong? Well, they might have played really well for 75 minutes, and on the other side, a winning team might have fluked a goal, and but actually not played particularly well. And all too often, sometimes the IPA would come in and do an interview on how did that go. Essentially, if it was deemed to have gone well, the interview would be a breeze and not too many searching questions. But often you learn a huge amount from things that could have gone better in a project that went well overall.
I agree with that. I think it's a great opportunity for us.
And James, anything?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we discussed today, talking about technology and AI, I think the future is really bright when it comes to lessons learned. I think there's real opportunity. In the context, let's say, I know from my time at Rolls-Royce, their global repository of lessons learned is circa 10,000. Transport for London, circa 10,000. If you could take away the sensitive data out of these repositories of data, and industry could bring them together, on these major GMPP programs that are currently being worked on. Imagine the repository, let's make the number up, 1 million lessons. Get AI in there, you're working, sort the metadata out, which AI can actually do for you. I'm working on a project, it's in this location in the UK, this is the SRO, these are the supply chains, this is the complexity. AI, tell me the top 5 lessons that I need to focus on today. Tell me that, and it would be so powerful. The human cannot go through that repository. So I think the future's bright in the context of lessons on major programs using technology.
Okay, I'm going to come on to lessons in a second, but I've got a really interesting question from Matt Wyndham about risk appetite. He's asking whether actually the government has a strategic discussion at high level about the sort of risks across the portfolio, or does it just emerge as each project is considered separately? Do you think the government's got a sort of view on risk appetite? I have a view on this from working in government, but I'm very interested, Matt, in what your view is about how the government thinks about risk in projects.
The government finds it very difficult to think about risk, and I think for 2 reasons. Firstly, the departmental structure means really projects are essentially departmental, and one of the reasons that the IPA and NISTA are important is to get that cross-government view, and to try to make them as unsiloed as possible. But the starting point just are the silos of departments, and that is a reality of government. Could it be broken down in future? Potentially, yes. There definitely should be more cross government working, but it just is a reality. So there is risk analysis, risk judgments, and risk judgments according to circumstances as well. We took a very risk-on attitude during COVID to move things fast, and I've got the scars on my back to prove it, because there were lots of we had to hit it hard, and sometimes that meant that you made more mistakes by the nature of things, and that was all in the name of saving lives, and that brings me to the second reason government finds it difficult. It's because of both the substance and the noise, the politics, the public scrutiny, and so you end up with government normally too much risk off, because people only want to go ahead with projects they are absolutely certain are going to be successful. But that isn't just a government thing, really. And I think protection of those who go for projects that might be riskier to pull off when they don't work, but the project was run well, I think is a really hard thing. It's very hard to do, but really important.
No, I'm just going to say I totally agree with you that we need to be able to distinguish between good failures and bad failures.
Yes, you put it far better than I did.
So, and that's key for better government. Okay, we're coming to the last 5 minutes, and I want to get all of you to disgorge. We talked about the opportunities in AI of compiling this great sort of compendium of lessons, but running successful transformations. What are your 2 or 3 key lessons that you want to share with everybody who is on this webinar and is going to listen subsequently? James, what are your sort of critical lessons for success?
I think we've covered a few of them in there, but it's about sponsorship. It's about having a clear vision. It's about your stakeholders, because once you've got the vision and everybody's on the journey, once you've got the sponsorship from top down, the exec, everybody's on the same journey. Your stakeholders are clear and you've got that real good communication with them. The environment that needs to be in place is good project, program and portfolio management. The core of what APM is all about, the core of the IPA falls into the other element of assurance. So whatever, when you're on big government programs that are costing billions of pounds, you've got hundreds, if not thousands of people working all to that vision together. How do you know, apart from getting your reports internally, that you're meeting your time and your costs? You need good assurance, and assurance is key. The IPA provide that external assurance, but internal assurance is really, really important. So for me, they're the key 5 things: the vision, the communication, good project and program management, stakeholders, and assurance.
Do you want to add to that list? And I would just want to throw in one question, one which I think comes to you, which is how do you manage the risk of change fatigue when you're doing these transformations that go on forever? That was a question that came in. So
who's that to, Jill?
That's to Steph.
Grace, yeah, so absolutely agree with that. So to James's points there, I completely agree with that. I think when the people that are receiving the change, the end users, they're the ones who are going to feel the pain, aren't they, when change doesn't go as well as expected. So you've got to really create that compelling vision. You've got to make sure that those people understand what's in it for them. The worst thing you can do to an organisation is not have an integrated plan of when you're delivering change. So if you've got, for example, a change activity happening in programs, and then a change activity happening in the supply chain, and then a change activity over in HR, and all of the people impacted are that one group of people, you have lost your audience. You have lost the people. It's a well-being issue. You're disengaging and you're over-promising, and you won't deliver what you've promised. So think really long and hard about integrating your deployment of all of your change activity, and make sure it's really consolidated, and then roll it out as a integrated plan. Because there's nothing worse than change fatigue. I've been there, and you can see people, and it's not great, and it won't land. You won't land it, and people will just revert back, and they'll find a way around it, and you won't land your change. So change fatigue can be avoided if you plan effectively. That's my view on that, and I think it's a really great question. But you can avoid it. You just have to think about integrated business planning when you do it, rather than just going off in silos. You've got more chance of success. So yeah, thank you.
And Matt, your critical lessons for success.
Well, I agree with all of those already said, but the 2 I'd add, the accountability that we talked about at the start, and then my final one is finances. Make sure you get the Treasury on board, and that, frankly, the best bit of the NISTA plan is that it'll report to the Chief Secretaries of the Treasury. Because in government, when you're spending money, if Treasury aren't properly on board, then it becomes an absolute mess. So accountability and finances.
Okay, and we've managed this absolutely almost perfectly to time. So as we move into the last minute, could you join me virtually in thanking our fantastic panelists, James White, Steph Illingworth, and Matt Hancock,